In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human without access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the five senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, the human actually established contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test subject retained full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming it was an onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to the man's concerns. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking to him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued, but were not convinced until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known. At this point, a sizable portion of scientists left the study. After a week of conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days. Still, he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point, he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. He continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer convert sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite chunks of flesh off from his arm. The scientists rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to a table so he could not take his life. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head, and despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with a scientist for the first time in the study. He whispered, "I have spoken with God and he has abandoned us," and his vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death. This is a creepypasta, or in other words, it is a work of fiction. Still nonetheless an interesting story, but maybe we can find actual evidence of a higher power. The infamous ghost bus of Beijing. The story became a modern legend in China and has since spread around the world. The story itself has a few variants depending on who is telling it. According to most accounts, this story takes place sometime in November 1995. Of course, it was a dark and stormy night. In Fragrant Hills, Hayden District, Beijing, a young man was waiting to catch the midnight bus, specifically bus number 375, back to his home. It was the last bus of the night. The young man entered the bus and sat next to an old woman. Soon after, the bus passed two men standing on the side of the road, waving at the bus for it to stop. At first, the bus did not stop for the two men because they were not standing at the bus stop. Remembering that it was the last bus of the night, the driver stopped to let the two men board. When the two men entered the bus, the young man realized that there were not two of them, but three. A third man was between the two, being held up by them. The two men were dressed as they were from the Qing dynasty from 300 years ago. Quite interesting to me, because you always hear of ghosts from up to 200 years ago, but never from, like, medieval era ghosts, and not certainly anything before that. They wore their hair in long braids, and their faces were whiter than a normal person. The third man they were carrying had his face hidden by long hair. Sounds like they were coming back from some kind of costume party with an intoxicated friend. The young man, naturally curious about these strange men, asked the conductor about them. The conductor replied that was probably just actors who didn't have time to take off their costumes. That seemed like a pretty good explanation. As the bus continued its journey, most of the passengers left, until there was only the young man, the old lady beside him, the strange trio, the conductor, and the driver. Suddenly, the old woman started throwing a fit and screaming that the young man had stolen her purse. The young man and the old woman started shouting at each other until the woman advised the two of them to get off the bus and go to the nearest police station. When they got off the bus, the young man became even more angry when he realized that he had just gotten off at the last bus and the police station was nowhere to be seen, but the old woman seemed calm and composed. "They had no feet," said the old woman. The young man was confused. "The wind through the window lifted their robes, and I saw they had no legs," he explained. "The men dressed in the Qing dynasty clothes were ghosts." The next morning, bus number 375 was reported missing. It took 3 days to find it. It was found submerged in a reservoir a mile from its final destination. The police found 3 bodies in the bus: the conductor, the driver, and the man with long hair. According to some variations of the story, the gas tank of the bus was filled with blood instead of gasoline. It seems that the old woman recognized that the men were ghosts and lured the young man off the bus to save him from the unfortunate fate that awaits the other 3 men. To make matters even stranger, there is no way that the bus could go that far with the amount of fuel it had. Maybe they used the blood as fuel to go the extra mile. Second, when they checked the CCTV footage around the reservoir that night, there was nothing out of the ordinary. The bus going into it was nowhere on the footage. The bodies were found far more decomposed than they should have been. Even submerged, there's no way the bodies would have decomposed as much as they did. Ever since the story became popular in the 2000s, people in China and around the world have debated whether there was any truth to it. After reading several different variations of this story online, many of the stories have different bus numbers. Sometimes the bus is 375, sometimes it is number 302, and other times it's 330. There is no general agreement on the bus number. Most importantly, there is no news online to suggest that a bus drove into a reservoir near Beijing in 1995. The Chinese government is known for censoring media. If this actually did happen, maybe the story was hidden. I believe in the paranormal, but this story is too outlandish for me to believe. The Amish Ghost Bridge haunts the Amish village and the third largest Amish community in the country, Sarasota, Florida. Amos is a celery farmer. One day his father was not well. Amos goes to the middle of Sarasota, to the market, to sell his celery. He meets Ingrid and falls completely in love. Since that day, especially every full moon, they try to go out as much as possible and meet at the bridge. They decide to run away together because they are completely in love. His father begins to get a hint that something is going on, and so one night when Amos tries to go out, his father holds him back for some time, so he arrives late. While waiting for him, Ingrid decides to pick the lilies there. She goes a little into the water, picks up some lilies, slips and falls into the water. She is completely unharmed except that the stones tore her dress and scratched her legs. Unfortunately, there is no way she could leave him a note or communicate this with him. She decides to take off her dress and throw it into the water and runs back home to get dressed and clean up. Amos finally gets away from his father. He reaches the bridge and sees a bloody dress in the water with an alligator nearby. He assumes that an alligator hurt his lover. He can't take it anymore. He goes to the top of the bridge and throws himself into the water. Ingrid doesn't take long. She comes back to discover Amos has jumped off the bridge. Now she is distraught. Her lover is gone. She also jumps off the bridge. It is said that Amos and Ingrid are still at the bridge, that their love is eternal. Though it is said they are never together, they are stuck on different sides of the bridge. People say that they see the ghosts of the lovers reaching out on the water. The bridge is not long, about 20 feet, but 20 feet is comparable to 500 miles when it is someone you love. People can see their mouths move, but they cannot hear their speech. Sometimes people see ghostly lights. While the strange thing about these ghostly lights is they never cross, but hover on two different sides of the bridge. And so, ever now, these two people who are completely in love with each other can never be together. The blinking crucifix is a strange optical phenomenon observed on March 24th, 1989 at Holy Trinity Cathedral in Ambridge, Pennsylvania. This phenomenon was discussed in the September 27th, 1989 episode of Unsolved Mysteries. A special mass was held at the church to commemorate Good Friday. More than 300 Catholics in a prayer group were at the church that day to celebrate Mass. As one man was praying, he looked up and saw that the eyes on the cross, which were normally open, were actually closed. He told his brother, who also saw that the eyes were closed, but he told his brother to go to the other side to see if it was just light or if it was real. And he looked over there, and his eyes were still closed. After Mass ended, the two brothers started crying, and their uncle, the priest, asked them why, and they said the statue had closed its eyes. The priest went to look at the eyes and found them closed. He called the man who had recently painted the crucifix and asked him what he had seen. He looked up and was shocked too to see the eyes were closed. He also began to cry. What do you think the explanation for this is? The Charlie Charlie Challenge is a game seeking truth of the future, specifically the answer to a yes or no question, while waiting for a balanced pen to move to the word yes or no written on a piece of paper. As with the Magic 8 Ball, most players, usually teenagers, do not really believe in the power of this mechanism. The game is a modern incarnation of the older Spanish game Juego de la Pizarra or pencil game. It has become popular in the English-speaking world in 2015, partially with the hashtag Charlie Charlie Challenge. I remember this. I was in middle school and my peers would do this in flip bottles. On April 29, 2015, an alarming tabloid television news broadcast of a game being played in the Hato Mero province of the Dominican Republic was uploaded to YouTube, and the unintentional humor of it led to the game trending on Twitter and breaking the language barrier of the game around the world. According to the Washington Post, Caitlin Dewey, the game is a valuable example of multicultural viral trends, how topics traverse languages and cultures online. For example, you will see that many players and journalists talk about the game as if it's new, when it's actually an old game that only recently crossed the language divide. Maria Elena Navas of BBC Mundo said that there is no demon called Charlie in Mexico, and argued that the Mexican demons with English names are generally American inventions. According to urban legend expert David Emery, some variations of the game have copied the popular ghost story La Llorona in Mexico, Central America, and North America, but the pencil game is not a Mexican tradition. In May 2015, the parody website The Racket Report, which describes itself as not intended to convey true or factual information, published a fake article which claimed that the game has called 500 mysterious passings in the Charlie Charlie Challenge. In June, the Fiji Sun, a satire website, reported that the Fijian Ministry of Education banned the game, and 3 Fijian teachers in Tavua were taken to the police station for questioning over allegations they forced their students to play it before being cleared of all charges. In May 2015, 4 teenage girls were sent to the hospital in Tunja, Colombia, and quickly released with diagnosis of mass hysteria. When the paranormal craze reached virality, it wasn't long before Christian fearmongers warned against dependence on malevolent spirit world. The Charlie Charlie Challenge was condemned as demonic. Several exorcists devised the idea that the game caused spirit possession, a claim echoed by Muslims in Jamaica and the United Arab Emirates. Several media outlets described the participants in the games as in good faith. In April 2017, an Eastern Libyan government banned the game, blaming it for 6 people taking their lives. Baby Blue Challenge is a ritual urban legend game. Baby Blue, born to a psychotic mother, was destined to be the child of legend. No one knows his real name, only that his mother hurt him with a broken mirror. The Baby Blue ritual, similar to Bloody Mary, is confined to the bathroom and requires a mirror. Go into the bathroom with a friend and miss the mirror. You can breathe on it or use steam from hot water. In the condensation, write the words Baby Blue on the mirror. Turn off the lights and cradle your arms as if you're carrying a baby in them. You should feel the weight of the child in your arms. Don't panic, keep him safe. And after a while, pass him to your friend. Be careful not to drop him. He won't accept it and will give you a scratch. You pick him up and drop him a few more times, the last thing you will see is the mirror shattering. Another version of the legend, a slightly different ritual. Go to the bathroom with the lights already off, stand in front of the mirror and say the words Baby Blue 13 times while swinging your arms back and forth as if you're holding a baby. After you've finished the 13th time, the baby will appear in your arms and give you a small scratch. At this point, it is suggested you drop the baby and run, as his psychotic mother will soon follow. She will yell at you from the mirror to give me my baby and try to make you suffer the same fate he did. I do not see the point of this. With the Charlie Charlie Challenge, you get a question answered. With this, all you get is a scratch. Seems like a waste of time.